Hi, my name is Jérome Duberry at the Hirschman Center on Democracy. Today we are here with Urs Gasser, Professor of Public Policy, Governance and Innovative Technology at the Technische Universität München, Technical University of Munich. He's also the Dean of the School of Social Science and Technology. Your research, Urs, focuses on the societal and regulatory implications of new technologies such as cloud computing and AI and quantum. Urs, my first question is about your book entitled Guardrails Guiding Human Decisions in the Digital Age. What motivated you to write this book?
First of all, thank you so much for having me for this conversation. I'm delighted to be here. And that's a forthcoming book. It will be released in March 2024, co-authored with Viktor Meyer-Schönberger, who's a professor of internet governance at Oxford University. And it's a fun project, long in the making. It's essentially an attempt at synthesizing our insights that we've collected over the past 20 plus years, understanding how we govern ourselves as a society. And the book comes out at the moment in time, obviously, where machines are increasingly important, where technology, AI in particular, is a force that probably shapes how we think about regulation, but also how we do governance. And that's some sort of at the core of the book as a question: what are the implications of these shifts?
In this book, human agency and decision is at the center. It's even in the title. Why? Why is it so important today to talk about human decisions?
So, if I may take two steps back, in my own scholarship, I've always had a puzzle. For many years, I've been studying young people and how they interact with technology. And for me, young people were some sort of a seismograph to observe and anticipate societal changes in not only how we use technology, but also how we interact with each other, how we build relationship, how we communicate with each other and the like. And so part of my work was focused on individuals and understanding their behaviors in an increasingly digitally networked environment. And then I had another strand of research that was much more abstract, looking at systems. And you mentioned briefly policy and regulation as things I've been looking into for a while at this intersection of society and technology. And what I never figured out really is how this world of systems, it's almost like Luhmann, right? System theory connects with the world of individuals. Think of like Habermas, right? To be, pointed. And guardrails is some sort of the answer to that, which is to say, yes, I believe in human agency, and I think we have an opportunity to double down, even if automation and AI and machines play an increasingly important role in our lives, to embrace human agency as exactly what makes us different from AIs, that we can live our lives according to our dreams and hopes and preferences, and we do so through making decisions. But at the same time, of course, we also have a whole series of global challenges, whether it's the climate crisis, global warming, whether it's public health issues, social inequalities. So we have societal concerns that we cannot ignore and basically need to figure out how can we shape decision-making while preserving human agency and yet steer things in a direction that are good for society and the planet. And guardrails is some sort of building the bridge between these previously, in my own biography, some sort of separated spheres of research, if that makes sense.
Could you give us some examples of these guardrails that you have identified?
So we're using guardrails as a metaphor for governance. And as we all know, there are, or at least in this place, we know there are many forms of governing, which is steering human behavior. The most obvious one is law, in some ways, at least for a trained lawyer, where laws prescribe certain behaviors, right? So think of a speed limit saying, well, you can only drive 50 kilometers an hour on this street. And if not, you get a fine. So that's an attempt to regulate behavior. But there are other modes too. And one that has become increasingly attractive, I would say, is using technology to regulate behavior. If you think about your iPhone and the apps that you download if you have an iPhone from the App Store, these are essentially engineering decisions that regulate how you interact not only with your phone, but actually pretty much how you interact with the universe of digital information. And so this notion that code or software is becoming in some ways as powerful, if not even more powerful than previously laws, that's a notion that has some sort of kept us up on the feet over the past 20 years. So there's been this notion, code is law, a phrase by Larry Lessig. And so one of the themes in the book is really how should we think about these different modes of regulation, these different types of guardrails. Sometimes they're technical, as in the iPhone example. Sometimes they're very social, like in the case of law. And there are many other forms of guardrails too. Social norms, for instance, are also guardrails that we, tend to go in, at least in this part of the world, in a meeting and would greet each other, and how we would converse is some sort of the human behavior of the participants is regulated by custom, by social norms. And so in the book we're mapping and discussing different types of guardrails, and the main focus ultimately is, okay, if we are headed towards a very uncertain future, given some of the big societal challenges I mentioned, which make it unpredictable where we're going from here as a society and as individuals, what types of qualities of guardrail should these guardrails have? So it's almost a book about the design requirements of future guardrails. If we want to empower individuals and strengthen this autonomy of the individual, but in light of big societal challenges that need some sort of steering and linking the individual to society and see it embedded in the societal context.
What motivated you to write these principles or guardrails? Or in other words, where did you find the inspiration or the inspiration for these guardrails? Human right principles, or because these are principles for today and also for the future. So how did you come up with these ideas?
So as I briefly mentioned, this has like a synthesizing quality. So the examples and stories in the book really come from 25 years of engaging as a researcher and as researchers and scholars in this domain of technology and society. And so the examples and insights and guardrail systems, if you will, that are featured in the book really range from things like water resource management in sub-Saharan Africa, all the way to the use of algorithms in mortgage lending practices in the US, to the airline industry and looking at checklists and procedures by pilots. So it's a very, we tap into some sort of, and try to, by way of example, feature different sorts of guardrail systems to test their qualities vis-a-vis what we think are design requirements for the future, given some of these seismic shifts that we see. And so it's been a fun exercise to go broad in a way and make one really I think, fundamental point, which is to say, well, there is this attraction now to look towards technology as a way to regulate or steer human behavior, to resist that impulse and say, before we do so, let's look at the full range of instruments available, the different sorts of guardrail systems, whether they're socially born or whether they're technological in nature or whether they're more incentive-based and have more kind of an economic flavor or whatnot, and really choose wisely what instruments we deploy to address some of the big challenges ahead, whether it's the governance of AI or whether it's, thinking about environmental issues, and make sure that we pick guardrails that are fit for purpose. And so just maybe to add one sentence more, one of these design requirements that we feel are important as a consideration is reversibility. So as we enter an age of discontinuity, where every day we have a new global crisis, it seems, the ability to also reverse decisions and reconsider decisions as better knowledge becomes available seems an important characteristic. Now, take the example of contract law. In contract law, the guardrail system contract law already anticipates that things may change. So the guardrail system contract law also includes rules if things are not delivered, or if plans change, or if you have even to breach a contract and get out of it. And so that's an example of a guardrail system that anticipates and offers reversibility of previous decisions by the contracting parties. Now contrast that with blockchain technology and smart contracts, which is exactly the opposite. So what this guardrail system smart contracts tries to do, and the blockchain, is reduce as much uncertainty as possible, define exactly what's promised and what the obligations are, make it even self-executing, and enshrine it in a blockchain so that it can never ever be changed. And I use this as just a point of contrast to show how reversibility, there are other criteria like plasticity as an example, how they may look very different depending on what guardrail architecture or toolkit we activate.
Maybe a last question. So you spent many years in the US. Now you're back in continental Europe. Talking about guardrails, I guess there are two different perspectives on guardrails, on governance of technology. Could you tell us a little bit about your view on these maybe two perspectives?
Especially recently, it feels some sort of conventional wisdom that Europe is taking a very strong regulatory approach when it comes to governing new technologies, which is to say, A, it is regulating, Europe is regulating, seeking to embrace and channel the direction in which technology is developed and used. And second, it does so by using one specific toolkit, which is law. And I would even go a step further and say it's predominantly using law as a constraint on behavior. And I think that's somewhat in contrast to the US approach, where there is more reluctance to intervene to begin with, although things are changing and heating up also in the US vis-a-vis some of these AI threats that have made headlines recently. But there is a reluctance to intervene so early compared to Europe, if you look at the innovation cycle of new technology. And when intervening, then it may be a different set of tools that come into play. So it's not necessarily immediately going to hard law, but coming up with things like best practices or standards, or creating blueprints, or creating economic incentive structures. And so it seems to be the case that, this mantra that the US is just more technology friendly, it's more complex and more nuanced than that. But I do think when it comes to these governance approaches, we see an attitude towards technology in the US that's more coming from an enabling mindset, and in Europe more from a precautionary, constraining mindset. And that is a key difference that's now crystallizing in these debates about how to govern AI.
Thank you very much, Urs. It was a pleasure having you with us. Thank you.